We first debuted this intraoral scanner last year at IDS in Germany. It's got some awesome upgrades from the previous version, the Aoralscan 2. So we'll get right into it. All right, so some of the great upgrades are it's very user-friendly. There's a new user interface. We've implemented a new software. It's very easy to use, really easy to navigate, and everything just kind of flows from one step to the next. Another really cool feature is the AI scan. So this is going to automatically filter out any tongue, cheek, glove, finger data that might be captured in the scan. So it's really going to cut back on the post-processing time of the scan and kind of like trimming and cleaning up that data. It'll also help cut back on the actual file size of the file that gets output. The other really cool feature that we've added is the motion sensing technology. So you'll be able to click a button on top of the scanner and it'll actually turn the scanner into sort of like a remote control. This really helps to avoid any kind of cross-contamination. When you're working chairside and you've got your hands in the patient's mouth, you really don't want to be touching your mouse or your keyboard. So this motion sensing feature allows you to move the scan around and view it, and then also move on to the next step in the scan without going back and having to touch your keyboard or your mouse. So the other cool feature with this is we've got two tip sizes. We've got a standard tip and a mini tip. So your scanner is going to come with 4 of the standard tip and then 1 of the mini tip. So the mini tip is great for pediatric patients, patients with really sensitive gag reflexes. It's also really helpful getting in there and capturing third molars, that sort of thing. So the tips are autoclavable up to 100 times. You can also put them in your cold sterile. That technique works as well. And the scanner comes with all the instructions that are needed for that. So the tips are the only part that's not covered under the warranty. So those are considered consumables. So if the mirror inside the tip happens to break or something like that, you would have to pay for a new tip, but they're relatively inexpensive. So we'll go on here with some more really cool features after you take your scan. So these steps are all completely optional. So if you're the kind of clinician where you just want to scan your case, you've been working with your lab for a long time, you trust them, you just want to send it and get it off to your lab, you can skip over all of these. But if you're the kind of clinician who prefers to be more hands-on with your cases, you have the option to modify and sort of preview all of these steps before you send that scan to the lab. So this one's really cool, the undercut check. So if you're working on a restorative case, maybe a long span bridge, and you want to make sure you've got a good path of draw in there, you can check those undercuts before you send it off to the lab. The next one's going to be the bite check. So that'll make sure that you've got enough occlusal clearance on the prep. So once again, that one's more geared towards restorative cases. And then the margin line auto extraction. So this feature is really awesome. The software does a great job of capturing the margin line without you really having to go in there and manipulate it a whole lot. You can also select which teeth you prepped before sending it to the lab. You can set the midline adjustment, and then you can also integrate our scan softwares directly with exocad. So this works for our desktop scanners as well, but if you are using exoplan, or if you're using chairside CAD, you can set up your order in exocad, and then it'll bring you right to our scan software. It'll have the order already created. After you take your scan, you can hop right back over to exocad, and your scans will be uploaded already, ready to design. So next I want to go over some of the technical specifications of the Aoralscan 3. It's kind of the drier stuff, but this stuff is really important too. So the scan field So obviously for the standard tip, it's going to have a bit larger of a scan field than the mini tip will. So it's also going to capture the data faster than the mini tip. So the mini tip, because it's taking a smaller frame size, it'll have to take more pictures to capture the same amount of data. So both of the scan tips have a 22 millimeter scan depth, which is really great. And our scanners use structured light technology, which is pretty common with the rest of the scanners out there on the market. The weight is really comfortable. It's 240 grams, which especially if you've got mostly typically female assistants, sometimes they're doing the scanning. It's so much more comfortable than some of those bigger, bulkier scanners out there on the market. And I'll go ahead after this, I'll show you the actual size of it. So it's lightweight, it's not going to strain your wrist while you're scanning. It's really easy to hold on to and sort of move your hand around while you're capturing that scan. So the files that we output are in the form of STL, OBJ, and PLY. So that's a pretty broad range. So you're not going to have any issues with bringing those scans into whatever CAD software your lab is using. We are an open source platform, so our scans are compatible with any of the other open source design softwares out there. And we'll cover those, which ones specifically we integrate with a little bit later when we get into the nitty-gritty of the software. So I do want to go over some of the PC specs. So the PC is not included in the scanner, which the scanner MSRPs for $11,000, and that's with a 1-year warranty. So the actual PC is not included in that. The PC is, we recommend definitely a strong gaming PC. So they usually run around $2,000. Intel Core i7 processor is our minimum recommendation. And then really the most important spec that you want to look for in your computer is to make sure that it has a NVIDIA graphics card. So all of our scanners only run with the NVIDIA graphics card. So I know like the AMD cards are getting pretty popular these days, but unfortunately our scanners are not compatible with those. You also want to make sure that it's got USB 3.0 ports, at least 2 of them, and you want to, it'll run with either Windows 10 or Windows 11. So I'll go ahead and I'll show you the scanner itself. It looks like this here. It's very small, nice and compact, really easy to hold. So this is I've got the standard tip on here, and then this is the mini tip, so you can kind of see a side-by-side size comparison there. So you can see the difference in the scan field with the size of the mirror there. All right, and then we'll cover this in the software in a minute, but I also wanted to show you guys this is what the calibration block looks like, and it comes with its own special USB cord. So it's got a little cover, and you just plug the scanner in there, and that's how you will run your calibration. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the software, and we can really get into the nitty-gritty of it. All right, so when you open up the software, it's going to prompt you to log in. So when you're logging in here, you're logging in through our cloud portal. So if you don't have an account already in our cloud portal, you'll click this link right here to sign up and register. So the account's free. It's free to your lab, and there's also unlimited storage in it as well. So we don't charge a monthly storage fee or any kind of monthly fees to use our cloud. So when you sign up as a new user, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to select what type of account you're wanting to make. So if you're a single doctor practice, you're going to pick this top one right here. If you're a multi-doctor practice, you're going to pick this bottom one, hospital or clinic. And then if you're a lab getting set up, you'll select the lab option. So you'll put your contact name here, and then in this box, you'll put the letters or numbers in the CAPTCHA field right there. And then you'll enter your phone number or your email here, and then you'll hit send. So sometimes this trips some people up. They might in this box try and enter that CAPTCHA again, but actually our system is going to either text or email you a 6-digit code after you hit send, and you'll put that number right in this field here. And then you'll create your password and agree to the privacy policy, and then you're good to get started with scanning. So I already have an account set up here, so we'll go ahead and get logged in. All right, so this is what the main screen is going to look like. You're going to see all of the cases that you've already scanned in the past. And so before we get into scanning, I want to point out a couple of features here in this top menu. So this first one is going to have your user profile, and then it's also going to have any of your lab connections here. So if you wanted to add a new lab, you would just click this Add New button. You would search for your lab right there, and you would have, pick something a little bit easier there. So you'll have this whole list of all of the labs that are available. You can select whichever one you want, and after you select one, you'll click this check mark, and then your lab will get a message saying that you're wanting to connect with them. They'll have to approve that connection before you can start sending to them, and once that's approved, they'll show up in your preferred labs in the software where you can automatically send your cases to them. So the next step here is going to be the calibration. So I showed you that calibration device earlier. So this step-by-step guide here on the screen shows you those steps. It's really simple. You're just plugging the scanner into that calibration tool. There is only one way that it fits in there, and you kind of have to use a little bit of force, and you'll hear it click into place, and that's when you know that it's seated all the way. So once you've got the scanner seated into the calibration device, you'll want to lay it flat on the tabletop to make sure that you're getting a nice even reading. And then you'll just press start. It'll do its thing, and then it'll let you know that it's finished. So we recommend calibrating every 15 days. So I just calibrated mine yesterday. But once 15 days have passed, this little bubble up here will turn red, letting you know that it's time to calibrate. So usually for offices, I recommend just picking a day of the week, usually your last work day, whether that's Thursday or Friday, and just calibrating that afternoon after the last patient has left. And that way it's all ready to use the next time you come in. So you'll want to do that on a every other week schedule. So the next thing to point out here is the settings. So there's lots of good customization that you can do in the software. So you can change the language here. We've got quite a few that we've already determined. And then we also, I think we're working on adding more and more as time goes on. The next option here is the default dentistry type. So you can choose restorative, orthodontics, or the check feature. So the check's going to be our oral health report. So you can pick whichever one of these based off of whatever you do the most in your practice. So when you go to set up your new order, you'll still have the opportunity to change this. This will just be your default. So we'll keep it set to orthodontics there. So for the US, we use the universal numbering system, but if you're in South America or anywhere else in the world, really, you can change it to the FDI numbering system. And then this next option for the save order path. So the system automatically backs up the scans onto your computer's hard drive. The default is storing it on the C drive, which is usually where the software is also installed. But if you wanted to back your scans up, say on an external hard drive, maybe you scan a lot and you don't want those scans taking up space on your computer, you could certainly plug in an external hard drive. You can save those scans to that location. Or say maybe you're not as computer savvy and you want those files to be really easily accessed. You could change things around to have that a folder set up on your desktop where you could store the scans so you can get to them really easily. And then this next one is just pointing to the design aspect of the exocad integration. So for the order file naming, you can add or remove any of these options here. The only one that has to stay on is the order ID, but you can uncheck all of these, and then whatever order you check them in is the order that the file name will build. So for example, if we wanted to have the patient name, the date that the order was created, and then that order ID we have to turn on, we can build the file name in the same order that we click those buttons. So you can really get creative with how you want to store your order names. So for the save format down here, so this option is really going to depend on whatever design software or CAD software your lab is using. So the save exocad order will output the files ready for exocad. The save third-party order will output files ready to be used in 3Shape. And then the save dental wings order is for dental wings compatible files. So if you don't know what type of files your lab is using, I would recommend to just go ahead and click all of them. It'll create a folder, a separate folder for each one. So if you didn't need it, you could delete that later. But at least you know that no matter what, your lab is going to be able to work with our scans. So moving on to the scan settings. So we've got some options here that we can change. The two that I always like to point out are the supports alternate day scanning. I think that one's a really good one to keep turned on because say for whatever reason the patient had to come back and you maybe had to adjust something and rescan. Having this turned on allows you to overwrite that previous scan and send in files to the lab. Now it also, so in your file backup on your computer, you'll still have that old scan in addition to the new one. So you'll still have access to that original scan. The other one that I like to point out, if you do a lot of restorative dentistry, you'll want to have this refined scan turned on. So this will prompt you to take a high definition area. So usually that's going to be the prep where you'll want to capture that higher resolution picture or image of the scan. So having that turned on prompts you automatically to do that, and it sort of just reminds you. All of these camera settings, you really don't want to be adjusting any of those. So those are adjusted automatically when the scanner goes through calibration. So all of those you really kind of want to leave where they're at. The other one here is the scanner tip heating. So generally low is totally sufficient for this. The scan tips do have an auto defogging feature, so we really don't get much fogging in our scans. But if you do notice that you're getting a little bit of fogging, you can bump it up to middle or high. So moving on to the pre-designed settings. So all of these here can be recorded in our oral health check report. So we've got a lot of options that you can record about the patient's oral health. So if you wanted to do this, I know some practices really like doing it when they've got a new patient come in. They'll just go ahead and scan the patient and kind of record this data just to have like a baseline of the oral status of the patient when they first came in. So the only sort of drawback with this is that we can't integrate it at this time with any of like the patient management softwares out there. But I think maybe in the future we will work on getting that integrated with some of those. So the next one is the About tab. This is really important if you ever need to see your scanner serial number. So this particular version of the software can be used with both the Aoralscan 2, the previous version, and the Aoralscan 3 as well. So if you're wanting to use your Aoralscan 2, you would just click on the picture, and you would still need to make sure that you have your dongle in place. The Aoralscan 3 does not have a dongle that needs to be plugged into the PC. The dongle is actually contained within the scanner body itself. So we'll keep that the same. You can also check for software updates through this software. So we usually come out with a new software, I would say every 1 to 2 months. So we're always trying to improve little things along the way. So you can check for updates here, which I'm using the latest version right now. And then the first time you go to use your scanner, you'll have to have it authorized, and you'll come to this About tab to do that. All right, so let's get into it. Let's create a new order, and we can start scanning. So today I'm going to be doing an orthodontic scan because I don't have anything prepped in my mouth, but we definitely have lots of good restorative options in the software as well. So the default that comes up is a crown, but we can also do inlays and veneers. We can also add ponics for making bridges or like a cantilever bridge. So there's lots of options here that we can add. And go ahead and make that one a ponic. So we can pretty easily create a bridge there. And then there's a little spot right here that just shows you what's going on. And then we can also select some implant options if you're doing a custom abutment or a screw retained crown. And we've got some material options here, acrylic or PMMA, composite, metal crown, or zirconia. And there's also an option here to add a pre-op scan. So that's going to be really helpful if you're doing, say, a big anterior restorative case. You might want to take a scan first of the patient's approved temporaries. It's also really helpful if you're going to be restoring a crown under a partial. So you can take a pre-op scan of the patient's existing tooth or their temporary that fits underneath that partial. And then scanning that as a pre-scan will allow your lab to match the contours and make sure that that crown will fit perfectly under that partial. All right, but I'll go ahead and clear that out. We're going to select orthodontics. And then the only thing in this order form that we have to add is a patient name. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. So in the doctor column here, you can add all of the doctors in your practice. So if you're a multi-doctor practice, you can go ahead and type a doctor name and click add. And then it's just as easy as that. You can add your doctors in there to select before you're scanning. And then same thing with the technician field. I usually recommend that the practice add their assistants' names in that field. So that way you can kind of track who was working with the patient or who did the scan if your assistants are the ones scanning. So in this little note section, these are all the notes that are going to get sent to the lab. So you'll want to put your shade in there if it's a restorative case, and then also any additional notes that you want the lab to follow. So that's about it for the order form. It's pretty basic, but really, really user-friendly. Oh, and this check option right here is what you would click if you were going to do that oral health report. But we'll go on with the orthodontic scan. All right, so it brings you straight into the scan software. So there's a couple of important features that I want to point out before we start scanning. So I'm going to do a live scan of myself. So we've got intraoral mode right here turned on, and then we also have AI turned on. So like I said earlier, that AI feature is going to filter out any extra tongue or cheek data. If I accidentally, get a little bit of my lower in the scan or something, it'll erase that data out. So I also like to note, if you're scanning on a model, just doing like a practice scan, you're going to want to have both of these turned off. And then if you're scanning for, say, a denture or something where you're having to scan the patient's palate, you'll want to scan the teeth like you normally would with AI mode turned on. And then when you go to scan the palate, you'll want to turn AI off. So I recommend kind of just when you scan the palate, you want to kind of go in sections and sort of build the data onto itself so that it has something to reference. So this last option right here, this metal tooth scan, is really helpful to turn on if you're scanning, say, a metal scan body, if the patient has a lot of amalgam fillings, or if the patient has, gold or silver crowns in their mouth. You'll want to have that turned on as well. So we'll go ahead and start scanning. I'm going to pick the scanner up. And as soon as I do, it's going to turn on, and we're going to be ready to start capturing data. So whenever we scan, we want to make sure that the mouth is really dry. So I'm going to suck in some air to help dry off my teeth. All right, so I hit the button on top of the scanner, and that pauses the scan. So I captured my lower in there a little bit. I think it was probably a little too far away for the AI to pick it up. But we've got this really cool feature right here called Remove Isolated Data. So that will cut out any sort of islands of data. So I'll go ahead and hit that, and it'll trim that away. And if think it thinks it's a little too big, so I'll go ahead and use this edit tool, and then I can get that out of there. All right. Okay, so the scanner itself is really quick. So I was able to capture that whole upper arch in 578 frames and in a minute and about 15 seconds. So it moves pretty fast. Looks like I missed a little spot right there on the anterior. So I'll go ahead and pick that back up. So whenever you go to rescan something on the same arch, the scanner will jump right back to the area where you have the scanner. So you're not having to start at one spot or another. So I'll go ahead and pick it back up. We're ready to scan. So you can see it captured that pretty quickly, and it went right back to where we left off. All right. So after we take our scan, any little holes will show up in green. So you can see I've got a tiny hole right there. It's not a big deal. So in this stage, we can also view our undercuts. So if you're doing a bridge here, we can imagine that we're doing a bridge on 12 through 14. We would want to set that view direction with the occlusal looking down, or looking down at the occlusal. So we would want to set it, we'll make believe that these teeth are prepped and 13 is missing. So we'd want to be able to see the whole margin of number 12 and the whole margin of 14 all in the same view. So we'll set that view direction and then double click. And that'll set the view, and it'll show us any of the undercuts here that might be on the preps. So that's really cool. It gives you like a live snapshot of anything that you might have to adjust while the patient's still in the chair. It's avoiding the whole back and forth of the lab calling and wanting a little bit more room or more path of draw. So I think that's a really great feature that's really helpful. Another cool one is the part lock. So, say you need to rescan number 2 here, but you got a really good scan of number 3, and you want to make sure that you keep that data and it doesn't get messed up when you rescan number 2. So you can use this part lock to draw on number 3 there, and then when you go back to rescan number 2, it won't edit any of that data. So that spot there on number 3 would stay locked. You wouldn't be able to scan over it, and everything that you do scan would be stitched into to that section. But we'll go ahead and unlock that. All right, so those are the major features there. I know I went over this edit tool a little quickly. So there's a sort of just a click in select option, and then there's also a lasso option that you can use to trim and clean up any of your data. All right, so we'll get right into it, and the next scan will be the lower. And so I've got that refined area scan turned on. So I'll go ahead, we'll pretend we've got number 14 prepped here, and I'll double click on 14. And now that whole area will be a high definition version of the scan. So it'll be a super detailed version. So you definitely want to have that if you're working with any kind of restorative preps, that sort of thing. So we'll move on and we'll get the lower. So I'm going to dry my mouth off again. All right. So we've got a couple little holes here. So I'll go back and just try and get those filled in. Maybe I'll shoot for this this interior interproximal area. I probably just had a little bit of saliva in that area, so the reflection kind of stopped it from being captured. I don't have the luxury of having an assistant with air and suction. So I'll go ahead and we'll rescan that area, and we'll see how the scanner does at picking that back up. So it did a good job of capturing that and closing that hole. So you can see we're still, the scan speed is really great. We're capturing 613 frames for a full arch, which is awesome. And we're just under 2.5 minutes of total scan time for 2 arches. So next we'll go ahead and take a scan of the bite. I always like to, in this stage, I'll click this remove isolated data because I think it just kind of helps clear up the scan. I would definitely say in the pre-design step, you have the option to edit the scan data. So I usually recommend to clinicians to sort of do all of like the heavy editing in the pre-design phase, kind of after the patient has left the chair, just to kind of cut back on the patient's chair time and help them be more comfortable with the whole process. Or if your patient maybe needs a break, then that would be a good time to edit any data that you want in the scan. So I'll take this time now to show you guys the motion sensing feature. So I'm going to double click this button here on top of the scanner. So clicking once pauses the scan, and then double clicking opens up the sensing feature. So we'll move the scanner up, and this will let us rotate the scan around using the scanner itself. So we can see all the features there. And then I'll double click again, and we can move the scanner to the right, and that'll take us to the next step, to the bite scan. So we've got that HD mode turned on, so it will want us to select a high definition area on the lower as well. So we can pretend that we've got, this is 19 there, prepped. So what you'll want to do is you can scroll in and out, and that determines the radius of the selection that you're making. So maybe if you're only doing an inlay, you could scroll in and capture just the occlusal surface. Or if you're doing a 3-unit bridge, you might want to scroll out a little bit more and select a larger area. All right, so we'll move on to the next step and get that bite scan. So the scan software automatically has you capture 3 bites. If you're really happy with the bite position on the first bite scan, you're fine to move forward after that. But if not, you can capture all 3 of the bites. So the first one is going to be on one quadrant. The second one is going to be on the other posterior quadrant. And then the third one is going to be dead center. You're going to capture the midline. So when you start the bite scan, the arches will both be over here in this area that says upper jaw and lower jaw. So as soon as you see those kind of snap into place into the bite scan on the screen, that's your cue to stop the scan. So usually what I recommend is to move the scanner in place with the patient's mouth open, and then have them bite down. And then once they bite down, start the scan. And then once those arches snap into place, you'll want to click the button on top of the scanner to pause the scan. You want to, when you're scanning the posterior quadrants, you're wanting to aim for the area between the first molar and the second bicuspid. So we'll go ahead and do that now. All right, so it's really quick. You don't have to take a lot of information for the bite scans. So you can see here, my other side is a little bit open, so I'm definitely going to want to take that second posterior quadrant scan. So we'll go ahead and do that now. All right. So this positioning looks really good now. That's about as close to my natural bite as it's going to get. So I will go ahead and just scan the midline scan regardless, just so you guys can see that as well. So we'll go forward into that. All right. So we've got a nice solid bite there captured. So we are ready to wrap things up and go into the pre-design step. So during this step here, the software is just sort of packaging all of that scan data that we just captured, and it's saving that to the computer's hard drive or to wherever we've designated to have those scans saved. So that's what it's doing in this step. It's also really important to note that it's not on the cloud website yet, so you have to still send that case off after this step is completed. So next in the pre-design phase, like I mentioned before, all of these steps are completely optional. If you are ready to send it to the lab at this point, you're more than welcome to do so. You just hit this go to send button right there at the bottom. But if you like to sort of play around with your scans, have a little bit more, be a little bit more hands-on with your cases, we're just going to follow along this menu here up at the top, and we'll go through all those steps that you can really play around with the scan and make things exactly what you need. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim up some of this data here. So we'll make a model later on in this step. So having sort of a nice smooth area really helps to get that model nice and clean. All right, so that is looking pretty good. So we'll move on there. And this first step up here at the top is the coordinate adjustment. So we're really just setting the midlines on the case. So for this step, I definitely recommend doing it with an actual mouse. It's pretty difficult to do with your trackpad on your laptop. So that all looks pretty good there. The next step here would be to mark the teeth. Now for this step, we don't have the option to do that because we're doing an orthodontic scan. So if we were doing a restorative scan, you would have the option to mark the tooth. You would just select the tooth number. There's a little box that would pop up here. You'd select the tooth number and then you double click on whatever tooth you're making, and that would set your tooth number. But this next one we're going to go over is the bite adjustment. So this step here, you can view if you've got enough occlusal clearance, and then you can also open your video slightly. So this, we use a heat map here. So say, for example, we'll keep using picking on number 14 there. So say you are going to be doing an EMAX crown on number 14, and you know that you like to have 1.2 millimeters of occlusal clearance on your EMAX crowns, you would set this at 1.2, and then you wouldn't want to see any color markings on number 14. So that would let you know that you've got plenty of occlusal clearance on that prep there, and the lab should have no problem making that restoration. So for the this little calculator down here allows you to adjust the occlusion. So this allows you to open the video very slightly, so only 1/10 of a millimeter. But say you like your occlusions to be a certain way, you can go ahead and change this however you want to set your occlusion, and that will close the video slightly. So you can also, maybe when you did your bite scan, you felt like maybe it was a little more open than what you're seeing in the patient's mouth. You can adjust that here manually as well. So we'll not save that. So this next step would be to mark the margin line. So once again, that's only going to be available in a restorative case, but I don't have any preps in my mouth, luckily. So it doesn't really work very well on natural teeth. But so for this margin line option, once again, after you mark the teeth, they'd show up here. You would click on whatever tooth was prepped, and then there'd be a little button down at the bottom with an A with a circle in it. So that's going to be our auto marking feature. And like I said, our auto marking feature does a really good job of detecting the margins. I've used some other auto marking features in the past, and they definitely don't come close to ours. And then after the margin is marked, if there's anything that you are wanting to change, you can still edit the margin after that point. So the next step here is going to be your undercuts once again. So you can check your undercuts for your upper arch or your lower arch. You can just click these two buttons here to toggle between them. So the view direction is going to change. You'll move it and then double click. So whatever view direction you set, that's where it's going to set the view direction for the undercuts. So you can see also it'll tell you sort of how deep those undercuts are. So in some areas it might be a little more superficial, whereas other areas it might be more extreme. But you're just moving that arch around to whatever view you want to see the undercuts, and then double clicking, and then that sets the undercut direction. All right, so these last two here are really cool. I think they're some of the best features in our software. So this AccuDesign option allows you to design a model within the software. Now, if you have one of our 3D printers, you can go straight from scanning model design, and then you can go right from this software into AccuWare and actually nest and print your models in there. So we're going to do non-separated models for both of the jaws. We'll hit OK there. All right, so it gives you one last chance to edit any of your data that you took. We already did that step, so we'll go onward. All right, so you can have a hollow model or a solid model. Generally speaking, you want to have a hollow model. It uses less print resin, that sort of thing. I'd say the only time that I would really recommend doing a solid model is if you're trying to print a model with a really deep palate. Sometimes keeping that solid will help support the palatal area there. But we're gonna bring these all the way down. We want the models to be as short as possible, so that'll help us cut back on our printing time and also the amount of resin that we use. So we'll go forward there. All right, so now it's just gonna build the model. So that's what it's working on. And then when we get to the next step, we'll have some options to customize the model, add some features to it. So I'll show you those in just a second. All right, so we can add any of these features to the model at this time. So I definitely like adding drain holes. You can pick the size that you want for the drain hole, and then you just hit generate, and it'll add those for you. So these are really helpful because it allows the resin to drain out after you remove your print from the printer. And so this helps so that you're not kind of, knocking your model off and then you've got a bunch of goopy resin that's coming out that was trapped underneath your hollow model. So these drain holes are really helpful. And we can add text to the model. And so you just click that text plus button, and then you can double click anywhere on the model to add that text there. And then you can also decrease or increase the height of your text as well. And the text size too. All right. And then you can choose if you want it to be convex or concave. I usually like doing it concave because it imprints the text into the model. I think it looks a little bit cleaner. And the last thing we're going to want to do is add an articulator. So this gives a nice vertex articulator to the model. I think usually medium works pretty well. And we can double click and it adds the articulator on there. And then you can move the articulator around and the little front part will move with it. All right, so we are all ready to go to print there with our models. So we can click this little next button and it's going to finish everything up, and then it's going to automatically generate those STL files that will be ready to print. So like I said, if you have one of our printers, you can click this print button down here at the bottom and it'll open up AccuWare and help you get the print all set up and ready to go. If you don't have one of our 3D printers, it'll still generate those STL files for you, so you can print them or your lab can print them. And it'll automatically add those files into the file folder. So we can click this project folder right there and it'll show where they are stored on the computer. All right, so now we are ready to return back into our software. So we've got our models all wrapped up. All right, so don't be alarmed. It always adds the models right here on top of the scans. So we can turn those off down here on the side. And so any of these we can kind of gray out the models if we want to sort of have different views of them there. So this last module that I want to show you guys is the ortho simulation. So this is going to give the patient a snapshot of what their smile could look like if they do orthodontics treatment. So it's not an ortho planning tool. I always like to point that out. You can't print like the stages for making aligners with this software. This is really just showing the patient what kind of a transformation they could have if they chose to do ortho treatment. So we'll go ahead and delete out my third molars here on the lower. And you can move any of these around. You can change the area. The software usually does a really good job of sectioning out the teeth, but if it didn't for whatever reason, you could change the area that was contained in that prep. You can also, if it possibly misnumbered a tooth number, you can change that here. One thing to point out for all of you based in the US, orthodontists usually go by the FDI numbering system, so that's what you'll see in this part of the software. All right, so we'll move forward to modeling. And so it sectioned all the teeth out, and it gives more of like a rendering of the teeth. So that's what it's working on right now. So everything's still in the same position. It's just creating a rendering that will look the same as the recommendation that it's going to give, or the future snapshot that it's going to give. So there's the rendering that it did. So now we can move forward to the tooth setup phase. And so what this is going to do, it's going to close any diastemas. It's going to open up any crowding, and then anything that's in a crossbite or a class 3 occlusion, it's going to bring into class 1. So you can definitely see that here. I've got this little guy turned out that it fixed and tucked in. I've got this one here in crossbite that you can see. And the software brought that in over here. And it also set my midline to be more in line with where it should be. So you can use these views that are really easy to be able to show the patient, especially if you're not as comfortable kind of moving things around in 3D yet. That can kind of take a little while to get used to. So it shows everything that it's moved. You can see it brought this little tooth up where it should be. And then, so same thing with that guy right there. All right, so you can have different views of all this. You can also export it or do an animation where it'll go through, we can click play here, where it'll show the expansion and it'll show the whole transformation process. So you can use that to show to your patient as well. So we will go on ahead and jump back into the software now, and we will go over the sending phase of the scan. So same thing, it puts the models here in place over those arches, so we can just go ahead and turn those off. So now we're going to go to send. All right, so this is the stage where you'll go ahead and send your case off to the lab. So I've got a little fake lab account created right here. So right now I'm sending the case to myself. But you'll have your other labs after they accept your invitations all in a list right here. So you can also check this button if you want your lab to send you a design confirmation before they move on to the final. And all of that can be done through our cloud portal. So in our cloud, you can track the progress of your case. You can view any design images. You can send messages and notes back and forth to your lab. And it really gives good integration and good communication with the lab. So we'll go ahead and click send there. And it's going to export the file, and then it's going to bring us back to the home page, and it'll show the progress of the case getting sent off. All right, so it'll show it here sending. And after it's sent, we'll have a little button here that says waiting to be accepted. So that means that it's waiting for the lab to approve that they have received the case. So once they approve that they've received the case, it'll show up green like this, and it'll say that your scan has been accepted, which is what you want to see. So one thing that I also like to point out right here is a link to the web-based version of our cloud portal. So that's the version that your lab is going to use. So if you're getting a new lab sort of set up with this, you can click that button right there, and it'll take you right to our homepage, and you can share that web address with them. So also, if you're maybe not in the office and you want to check up on your cases at home or on your phone, you can use this to get logged in there as well.